On today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. We are going to chat about the latest developments from Panthers training camp. We are going to go more into why Spencer Knight got the contract that he did, going back to last week's show. And now that we are in the month of October, we are now going to go over the Florida Panthers schedule for the month of October and what to expect, all on today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, October 5th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey and Locked On NHL. We'll be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League. So, guys, the Panthers were back at practice yesterday. At the Panthers ice den, and quite a few developments for the Panthers as they did not put a full roster of even players on the ice due to, players being a little banged up. And Paul Maurice spoke about how players at this point of training camp want to show how unselfish they can be by not taking a rest day. And Paul Maurice talking mostly about how the coaches have to protect the players mostly from themselves. So we have a few developments based on players who did not practice yesterday for the Florida Panthers. Those include Carter Hagee, Ryan Lomberg, Matthew Tkachuk, Colin White, Patrick Hornquist, and Nick Cousins. So those are the following players who did not suit up for the Panthers yesterday at practice. But let me bring in my guest here on the show. It's another Winans Wednesday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, Jacob Winans. Jacob, welcome back to the show on another Winans Wednesday.
Thank you for having me. We're almost there, man. Just I think after this we'll have one more show before regular season hockey, so we are right there.
Mm-hmm. We are getting towards the starting point of the season. It's so close to gentlemen, start your engines on this one because it's gonna be a nice marathon for this team. But from last week all the way till now, we've had some two preseason games, some roster cuts for the Panthers. A big chunk of them went to Charlotte. Now the roster is up to 30. But I want to give you the floor for a little bit on your thoughts on the cuts and who are some surprises and who are some players that you are looking at who are currently still with the team on who could possibly make an impact.
Yeah, so far with the cuts, I wouldn't say there are really any surprises necessarily. A little bit, just a tiny bit disappointed that Grigory Denisenko didn't make it farther through this camp. I thought he was going to be a finalist for one of those remaining forward spots. Another one that was a little bit disappointing to see was Anton Lepchi. I thought he was going to be a contributor pretty much right away, but I wouldn't say there's any surprises necessarily. I think we have a lot of quality options to call up from the AHL should that be necessary. There's been a couple of young guys who have really impressed to this point through training camp, and the two that I'm thinking of the most are Justin Thordiff and Logan Hutsko. They've stuck around. They've been a part of the camp roster for longer than I expected. To see them outlast Grigory Denisenko was a little bit of a surprise, but not necessarily reason to sound any alarm bells or go calling anybody a bust or anything like that. We're still way premature for that. But I think the pressure is definitely on Denisenko to produce and be a star at the AHL level this year, given that he's starting camp with Charlotte and not with the Florida Panthers.
Funny enough, you mentioned Justin Sordiff, because right before shooting this episode, I was rewatching some of the press releases that the Panthers had, and Mark Stahl spoke, Paul Maurice, and Justin Sordiff was one of the guys who spoke from Panthers training camp. And one of the reasons why he's actually still around with the team, he actually got to clarify, is because he wasn't participating in the early part due to injury. Actually opened up a little bit about missing the World Juniors, and because of what happened at the tail end of development camp, and missing the second part of World Juniors. Of course, the first one was postponed due to COVID, and just having a little bit of a setback for himself and getting more of that camp feel. So I think that's mostly the reason why he's still staying around. And he even said it himself, because he even said himself that, oh, I want to get a few games in before I go to Charlotte. That, in his words. So I'm thinking, if I'm a player and I'm still in camp, I'm thinking, oh, I want to show that I could still make the team. But he's already saying himself, I want to get a few skates in before I go to Charlotte. Basically, pretty much saying that there's probably been already conversation between Paul Maurice and Justin Sordiff saying, hey, let's get your legs warm a little bit before you get sent down, and still have a little bit of that team camaraderie, because only 2 preseason games left for the Panthers. Home game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which the Florida Panthers will be holding all their 50-50 raffle will be going to to anyone impacted by Hurricane Ian, and especially in the southwest part of Florida. So the main players aren't really going to be playing. I mean, Ryan Lomberg, Matthew Tkachuk, and Nick Cousins specifically were talked about how those guys are going to likely be held out of the last 2 preseason games. So this is a little bit of an opportunity to still get time on the NHL ice, as Justin Sordiff has not had that much time here so far.
Yeah, definitely. He's a guy he's been impressive really in every facet of his game since all the way back since the prospect camp. He's just been really good, really solid, really mature for his age, for the fact that he's a rookie, hasn't played pro hockey yet. I think the future's bright for him, and I think they're doing the right approach as far as his development is concerned, letting him stick around in the pro camp, pick up those pro tendencies before sending him down to Charlotte. And like you said, this game against Tampa, it would be smart to hold out some guys from that one. We know how those games can get, preseason or not. You and I were both in attendance last year, and the game here in Orlando, and that one got completely out of hand really quick. We ended up losing Noel Acciari for most of the season as a byproduct of that game. It was a nasty game. So we know how those games can get. It doesn't matter whether it's regular season, playoffs, or preseason. Those 2 teams hate each other. So it's good to hold out some guys, maybe protect some guys from themselves when that game comes around. Now, it gives a lot of players a really solid opportunity to make an impact. Sordiff is definitely a guy who can open some eyes, whether he's expecting to go to Charlotte or not. The guy I'm really looking forward to seeing, because it seems like he's right on the verge of breaking through to the full-time NHL roster. He's got a real chance now. Alexi Heponiemi. He's had a really good camp. Coaching staff obviously likes him, and he's stuck around. And Eric Stahl is another one I want to watch in that game, because it seems increasingly likely that he may be turning his PTO into a full season contract, which is that's really good to have a veteran around, and he's impressed this preseason as well. So with that said, yeah, there's a lot of line combinations we can see, a lot of guys who have improved their games. The defense is still shuffling. We've got battles between guys like Carlson, Kierstead, and a lot of these guys trying to carve out their role. So it's going to be exciting to see a lot of these young players, what they can put together in these last 2 games and make an impact.
Yeah, and this is a time around camp where we're starting to see the players on their PTOs starting to get released from them. The Kings released Nate Thompson from his PTO, and as well as the Canucks releasing Danny DeKaiser from his PTO as well. So as camp goes on, we're starting to see kind of the writings on the wall. And I spoke about this yesterday about how not Mark Stahl, Eric Stahl being on the team affects different parts of the lineup of shifting people to the wing and making kind of like a chain reaction of different roster moves necessary for this team. Who's the one that misses out? That's something that we're gonna have to find out possibly. I mean, as far as like salary wise, they're just around the 85.5 range. So there's still needs to be a little bit of finagling of the cap. Of course, with Duke's IR space going to be coming off, and of course for you mentioned Heponiemi, he actually sat down with David Dwork, who had an article posted today on local10.com about Alexei Heponiemi and this opportunity. He's been like up and down with the organization, so this seems like his chance. We were talking about Denisenko and Heponiemi this summer. Now that Denisenko is officially sent down, it leaves a few players left, but Justin Sordiff even said that he was being sent down. Logan Hutsko, he hasn't been in the system as long for the Panthers. So it kind of seems that Alexei Heponiemi seems to be that guy. Of course, we spoke about he plays hard despite being an undersized hockey player, but still plays above his size. So that's really what I appreciate when watching someone like Alexei Heponiemi.
Yeah, he's electric with the puck, and I think the big thing with his transition, hopefully to the full-time roster now, is he's just gonna have to get more comfortable with the puck on his stick. He needs to play with a little more confidence. I think he just needs to trust his game a little bit. But if we look at his development curve, this is a guy who absolutely dominated junior hockey in Canada. He went over to Finland in one of the top leagues in the world, over in the Finnish Liga, put up nearly a point per game, and then put up a point per game in the playoffs in his time there as well. Before coming over to North America, it was a slow start for him here, just because his size, he's so undersized, and you're playing on a smaller ice here. But the guy has some crazy skill, and you couple that with his effort, like you said. He plays hard despite being undersized. He's a guy I think who has a real chance to make the roster. I think this might be his opportunity, and given the opening that could be there in the top six, at the very least the top nine, with Duclair out long term, Heponiemi could legitimately find himself skating with some really skilled players like Lundell or like Sam Bennett or like Alexander Barkov. He could find himself on one of those lines, and you can't really ask for a better introduction to the NHL as a rookie. It's your first time full time in the league, and you get to play with one of those three skilled centers. I think it's a great opportunity for him if he's able to grab onto it and not let it go. These last two games are huge for him, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Definitely will be a confidence builder of being plagued with some of the top guys on the lineup. Definitely would help him. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to talk more about why Spencer Knight got the deal that he did at $4.5 billion AAV. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And BetOnline is your number one source for all football betting this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, and podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day on this Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Jacob Winans is back for another Winans Wednesday edition. And Jacob, we've had this conversation last week about Spencer Knight getting his extension. We even at the time 4.5, seeing that it was a little high based on the department as a whole, not Spencer Knight specifically. Mostly the cap hit was mostly concerning through this fan base was the department. It's funny because Jake Allen of the Montreal Canadiens, I believe he just got paid. So, and it's still the Florida Panthers still have the most expensive goalie department that will come next year. But now let's dig into the reasons why Spencer Knight got the deal that he got. So Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts, I believe it was a Friday or Saturday release of the show, that he spoke about how the Spencer Knight got the deal that he did because, there's no official confirmation, and these are just theories around GMs talking to each other about how a lot of GMs thought that Jake Ottinger was going to get somewhere around the ballpark of 5 million AAV. So it seems as if when Bill Zito was going to the negotiating table with Spencer Knight, he's saying, we expect this guy to make this, so we're going to give you this. So that number seems to be, at least no official confirmation, 4.5. So what happens? Jake Ottinger gets paid. And looks like that Bill Zito kind of tied his hands a little bit when saying 4.5, at least reportedly, to Spencer Knight when talking about kind of a number to like reach for. So now, if Bill Zito was to go back on his word, how would that go with, like, I think about how would that go with the relationship with Spencer Knight and his agent? So I think that's the reason why 4.5 was settled, because Bill Zito kind of had his hands tied there.
I think so. I mean, honestly, the amount that we're talking about them going over, it's really, I won't call it insignificant because the Panthers are in a cap crunch, so it's every dollar against the cap is significant. But we're talking about like maybe if Zito waits in these negotiations a little bit, maybe 3.5, something in that area, maybe between 3 and 4. I don't think it makes that massive of a difference. But in all honesty, I'm okay with the slight overpay if it works. If it worked out in a situation where Bill Zito is saying, like, this is what I offered you before based on the projections I had. I'm not going to go back on that. His word is good, and I think that goes a long way in building a relationship and having a long-term partnership with Spencer Knight as the goalie for the Panthers. I think now it could be, I don't want to say Spencer Knight owes him one, but it can be something that is there on the table when you come to future negotiations. Like, Spencer Knight's going to remember, hey, you stuck to your word the first time. I'm more willing to negotiate with you. We have to remember, sports are a business, and behind every business are relationships. And Spencer Knight and Bill Zito, I'm sure with this contract discussion, sounds like it went extremely well. Not necessarily the most team friendly deal, but it's not a team killer. It's definitely player friendly, and I think we're fine with it, because at the end of the day, if Spencer Knight develops and progresses at the pace that he is, he ends up playing to his full potential. 4.5 is going to look like a steal regardless. So.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't have an issue with it neither, especially with 11 million the Panthers will still have to play with next season when all that buyout money comes out. And of course, during negotiations, this is the thing. During a negotiation, you can't put feelings into this, whether you're a player or whether you're a GM, especially if you're on the GM side of things, because you got to think about, the player is thinking about himself, which I don't blame the player for thinking. You're trying to get some security, but the GM is thinking about everyone under the cap. So it's like, how are we gonna do that? And we're seeing an example of that in Dallas right now with Jason Robertson. And the owner came out talking about not wanting to pay young players early. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm thinking about I'm thinking just about that situation in Dallas about not wanting to pay young players, but Dallas has a situation where they're paying two players in Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, who's had injury issues throughout the last few years, and it's like, but this Jason Robertson's a 40 goal scorer, and you're just that relationship is, at least from an outside point of view, it's looking to like be more fractured as we get closer to camp. I'm not sure about the latest reports on that, but as far as from a Panthers perspective, listen, the timing of this deal, we weren't expecting it right now around this time, but you said it best, the fact that they settled on that number, they did it now, and it was a number that was spoken about prior to Ottinger getting his. Looks like it was a smooth negotiation for the Panthers.
Yeah, the one thing with Bill Zito that we've seen time and time again is wanting to get ahead of the curve, wanting to get things done proactively. He has a track record now in Florida of paying guys early and before the market can explode on you. He tries to get ahead of it, and with Spencer Knight's case, maybe he overpaid by trying to get ahead of it, but it's not that big of an overpay. And honestly, it's a trend I want to see continue. I want our guys locked up long term as early as possible. You look at Barkov, got his contract before the season started. No ugly negotiations there. You look at Verhaeghe, who got paid, and everyone's talking at that time of that contract of, well, is he going to repeat his performance? Is he worth this money? Was it a one year wonder type of thing, and ends up dominating the playoffs? Imagine what his contract would have been had he gotten paid after that. So it's about being proactive and getting ahead of the curve when it comes to paying guys. And I would honestly, with Bill Zito at the helm, I have no problem with him jumping the gun a little bit salary wise, even if it does cost a few extra dollars here and there, because for the most part it gets us good value contracts. If you want to think of it in these terms, the money that he overpaid Spencer Knight definitely doesn't add up to the amount of money he would have had to pay Carter Verhaeghe had he not prioritized that early. So it's a net saving, depending on how you look at it. And I really don't have any problem with the contract itself. Mm-hmm. It's a lot better than being in a situation like Dallas. I think you just, as a GM, as an owner, you don't mess around with your future franchise cornerstones. I mean, those are the guys you're trying to build your whole franchise on. A guy like Robo in Dallas, Jason Robertson, last year they were a one-line team. They're probably in the top three of the lottery without Robo in there. I mean, he's that line with him, Pavelski, and Roope Hintz literally carried that team all the way to the playoffs and almost got them out of the first round. It was that line, and now you're talking about, I don't want to pay him early. It just makes no sense to me. Would you rather throw that money at a veteran who's almost 30 years old and declining? No, you want to pay your young guys early and get the best years of their career. So I'm happy with Zito prioritizing the signing of our younger players. And my apologies to Dallas. That's a tough situation for you guys because Robertson is a spectacular young player and he deserves to get paid.
Absolutely. And hey, looks like that Dallas might get also value in another signing, former Florida Panther Mason Marchment, who I believe has 3 goals in the preseason right now for the Stars. So so far so good, and for Mason Marchment getting his payday. So congratulations to him once again, and that he's off to a good start. So also maybe if Jason Robertson moves on, hey, maybe I'm not saying Mason Marchment is going to be a 40 goal scorer by any stretch of the imagination, but hey, there's some of that production that Dallas could possibly get back if he ends up being traded. The guys from Locked On Sabres were even speaking about a possible trade scenario for Jason Robertson. So, it could get very, very ugly in Dallas, that's for sure. But Jacob, it's October, and we have yet to go over the Florida Panthers October schedule. So we're actually going to spend the third segment in our show. It's talking about the October schedule now that we are about a week away from the regular season. We're going to go over, not necessarily game by game, but the month as a whole for the Florida Panthers. So we're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day on this Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Of course, on this Winans Wednesday, that means Jacob Winans is here to now discuss the Florida Panthers October schedule. So, now, and first of all, let's talk about some of the best sports months of the year for just sports in general. March, April, and October are possibly the three best sports months when you talk about hockey and basketball starting, football being in the middle of their season, baseball postseason is about to start, even though, unfortunately, the Miami Marlins are not going to make it. So, but October, we're having all four sports being active. It's really only the only month that it happens in the calendar year. But, man, we're about a week away, Jacob, and how excited are you for opening night?
Man, I cannot wait. Honestly, like you said, October is probably my favorite month of the year when it comes to sports. It's just it's an atmosphere, especially when we're privileged enough to live in an area like Florida and be fans of the South Florida sports market. We've got everything. We've got high quality hockey. You've got football. You've got baseball. Even though the Marlins season is now winding down, we've got college football right around the corner down there in the Miami area. Even though my Miami Hurricanes are not doing so great right now, but that's beside the point. I got basketball. We've got everything. So it's a really exciting time when the weather changes a little bit and the temperature gets cooler and hockey's around the corner. That's my time of year. So I'm so pumped, man. We're right there. Just a little over a week and we're good to go.
Curious to see, as we're in October, especially during football season, how many teams will be complaining about the sun, when it comes to playing some games, at Buffalo Bills. So let's see how many teams will be complaining at what in October weather for South Florida here. Just had to take a little shot at a division rival. But let's go over this October schedule, Jacob. Of course, we've been really pinpointing two matchups for this Florida Panthers team all throughout the month of October. Of course, we've been talking about opening night against the New York Islanders at UBS Arena, and of course the home opener against the Philadelphia Flyers, which two of them are have been bookmarked. But let's talk about really the rest of the schedule. We're going to see the Boston Bruins on here on the 17th of October. And there's actually been news now that Taylor Hall is going to miss some time for the Boston Bruins. So adding more insult to injury with Grzelcyk, Marchand, and McAvoy. So Boston's going to have a little bit of a hard time to start the season. A battle of Florida here. Only the second home game of the season. New York Islanders twice. And two rebuilding teams in Philly and Chicago, even though Philly might not end up in the top 5 in the draft because I think their coach will not tolerate tanking. And, of course, the first battle of the Tkachuk brothers in the division between Brady and Matthew. That's a 4 p.m. Start time on October 29th. So which one of these matchups are you looking most forward to in the month of October?
Yeah, so this schedule, it's pretty unique, and at first glance, you can look at it and say, hey, the Panthers have some cupcakes on here. You get Chicago, you get Philly twice, you get Buffalo. Islanders weren't really that good last year, so everyone can look at that and just be like, hey, we should we should have a pretty solid month. But below the surface, I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think the Islanders are going to be much improved this year. If we talk about the Isles last year, they really struggled early in the season because they had to play something like almost 15 consecutive road games to start the year.
13, exact.
13 consecutive road games to start the year because they had no arena yet. They're going to be better this year. Matthew Barzal just got paid today, got a huge contract. I think the Islanders are going to be much improved. So that first game is going to be tough. Buffalo, that team can score. They've got some growth to do, and they're not completely a finished product yet. They're still in the rebuilding phase, but they can score. They've got some offensive weapons. That's going to be a tough game. And if you look at that one, that's an afternoon game. So we know how the Panthers tend to perform in afternoon games. Sometimes they're just not. They don't have the legs, so we'll see. Boston, this is probably the most depleted we're ever going to see the Bruins. They've got some key players not playing. You have to capitalize in that game. That's a division game. You got to win your division games, especially when the other team is injured. And then we start some home games. So I'm really looking forward to Philly. Owen Tippett's return home should be cool. But you know, that's a team that is rebuilding, even if they don't want to say they are. And I think you have to capitalize and jump on them. We know how Tampa's going to be. That's going to be a playoff atmosphere. The Islanders again. That's going to be a really good game. Whichever team loses that opener is going to want revenge in that one. Chicago. That's the only game on the schedule in the month of October where I can say, you know, I feel pretty comfortable we are going to win that one. I don't.
I agree.
That's the one. And there are no easy games in the NHL, but if there's anything close to an easy game, it's that Chicago game. Philly's going to be again, that's a rebuilding team. I feel like we have enough talent to handle them, even on a night where it may not be their best game. You don't have to put your best performance forward to beat Philly. And then you get to Ottawa. And Ottawa is a team that I am really looking forward to seeing what they bring. Tkachuk versus Tkachuk. Ottawa's got Giroux now. DeBrincat. That team really had a A++ off season. They're without Cam Talbot in goal, but Forsberg is more than capable, and that's the game that I have circled for the month of October, where we're going to find out pretty quickly. Is Ottawa were they just an off-season winner, or is that a team that's going to challenge for a playoff spot in our division this year? So if there's one game outside of our usual chaos with Tampa that I'm really looking forward to seeing, it's that Ottawa game at the end of the month. I want to see what Ottawa brings.
Yeah, and Cam Talbot's going to be out 5 to 7 weeks reportedly, and even Anton Forsberg last year, 917 save percentage, 282 goals against average, pretty decent for a backup goaltender who could play more than half a season, playing 46 games. Honestly, Jacob, if there's one trap game in this schedule, which is 9 games total in the month of October, I'm going to go with the home opener against the Philadelphia Flyers, because a lot of excitement for this team coming back from after a horrendous playoff. And of course, you got the legs flowing in the first 3 games, being out on the road and just looking forward to coming home. There could be a possibility that the Florida Panthers could undermine their opponent and then end up possibly dropping on. Of course, we've spoken about how Philly could be rebuilding and they could be in possible denial about it. You spoke about Owen Tippett's return. But if there's that one game on the schedule here, I think that home game against Philly is definitely that trap game.
I could see that being a trap game. I really would not be shocked. The thing about Philly is Tortorella, for better or worse, whether we want to consider him a good coach or a bad coach, if he's too old school, if he's not fit to win in this generation of hockey. The one thing with Tortorella teams, they're going to play hard. It's not going to be easy against any Tortorella coach team. He pushes his guys. That's honestly, he does it to a fault, but the result is there. They compete hard. That they learn to grind. And Philly does have some offensive players who can score. You got guys like Konechny. You have guys like Owen Tippett, like we said. I feel like he's waiting on an offensive breakout. He should get the ice time now. Tony DeAngelo is on their blue line. That guy can score. I wouldn't be shocked to see Philly give us some trouble. And, I think in one of those Philly games, Owen Tippett's going to have a really big offensive output. He's going to score like 2 goals and an assist, and he's going to make us regret trading him just for that day. He's going to stick it to us one of those games. I feel like that's coming. I hope it doesn't happen in the home opener. But it's definitely possible. That's a real opponent if you're talking about trap games. Buffalo is another one that I think could be a trap game as well. They gave us some trouble a couple times last year. I fell behind in a couple of those games and had to make comebacks late. Guys like Tage Thompson, twice, right? Tage Thompson, Rasmus Dahlin is a high quality defender. They've got some talent in Buffalo too, so I think that's going to be a tough game as well. And I think looking at the schedule, I think those two are the games that I would consider some dangerous sleeper teams that could give us some trouble for sure. But I got a question for you. Do you remember last time the Panthers opened the season against Philly at home, the last home opener against the Flyers?
I'm going to say 2013.
Incorrect. It was actually the 2015-16 season where the Panthers went on to win the division. If I'm not mistaken, they put up a touchdown on the Flyers in that one and kicked the extra point. I remember that was Riley Smith having a breakout game. Yager, Huberto Barkov had a fantastic night. Vinny Trocheck, Riley Smith, and Jussi Jokinen were electric on the second line, and Big Nick Bjugstad got on the board too. So that was the last time the Panthers hosted the Flyers in a home opener, and they put up a touchdown. So we'll definitely be looking for a repeat of that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're while the feed did freeze, I think there was actually an injury to one of the Flyers forwards that was reported last week. I'm Daily Faceoff is actually freezing on me right now.
Sean Couturier.
Yeah, Sean Couturier. So their first line center. So he's going to be out for a little bit. So that could smell a little bit of trouble for Philly to start the season for them. So, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that it could be a trap game definitely for the Panthers, as John Tortorella teams, like you explained, are grinded out teams. I mean, ask Marty St. Louis, ask Vincent Lecavalier when they played for him in 2004 with Tampa Bay. So even though we spoke about more of this generation of hockey, those players. Of course, they found a way to win with him. So he has the resume, that's for sure. But Jacob, even though we had a little bit of connection issues towards the end of this show, I want to thank you once again for jumping on this once again Winans Wednesday edition of the show. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, you guys can find me online on Twitter at Jacob Winans 8. I will definitely be active there as we get going throughout the season here in the next couple of weeks. So you can follow me there. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. And I'll see you next week, where we'll be one day away from opening night for the Panthers. So looking forward to it, that's for sure.
Yes, sir. I cannot wait.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll be notified every time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden. We'll be covering all the preseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast every Monday through Friday. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.